Assalamu alaikum, I'm Aisha.
Assalamu alaikum, and I'm Amanda. And this is Converts Unplugged. No fluff, no holding back, just honest conversation.
Brought to you by New Beginnings, a platform that aims to support new Muslims on their journey through Islam from the Shahada and beyond.
For today's episode, we are honored to be joined by two of our brothers in Islam. We have Martin from Cardiff and Sheikh Bilal from Oldham. Thank you both so much for joining us today. Aisha and I are really happy that you could both take time out of your schedules for us. We'd really love to hear some details about who you are, who is Martin and who is Sheikh Bilal. Martin, why don't you start us off?
Assalamu alaikum, sisters and Sheikh Bilal, sorry. My name's Martin. I'm not technically from Cardiff. I live close to Cardiff, about a 30-minute drive away. I've been a Muslim 4.5 years now. I took my Shahada in June. It would have been June 2016. I've got quite a long story of how I got to Islam. It wasn't a quick, I've read a book and I'm happy. It was about an 18-year process.
18 years?
About that, yeah.
Mashallah.
So maybe, 16, 18 years. So yeah, I was born and bred where I live now, about 30 minutes outside of Cardiff. It's a predominantly white area. There's a handful of ethnic minorities. When I was a wee lad, there's a lot more here now. But going through school, it was not, you were white, you were Christian. There was no alternative, really. We didn't get taught any other religions, really. RE was quite an easy lesson. It was like an hour of just chilling and talking to the teacher about anything apart from RE. So I think being brought up in that sort of environment, and my parents were churchgoers, so therefore we were too. We used to do the Sunday schools and a couple of things outside of the Sundays. Until I got to about 14, and that started to change then. I found football teams and Sunday leagues, and so there was 3 boys in our household, my dad. So that took precedence then. Football became the Sunday norm rather than church. So we started to step away, I guess, when I was about 14. At this point, it didn't actually sit right with me what we were learning, and the lessons were just the Bible studies and stuff, like, so the prophets and their stories, but the story of God and Jesus just didn't seem to sit right with me. So I was happy to be playing football on a Sunday rather than going to church. So yeah, so quite a religious upbringing, I guess, is what I'm trying to say there. When I was 18, I got my first job in Cardiff. I met my first official Muslim who introduced himself as a Muslim. With hindsight now, I know there were Muslims in my school, but nobody identified as a Muslim. They would have been like the only Muslim in the year group, so I can understand the pressure that would have come with. So yeah, I was 18. I was being introduced to the whole team, and this guy said, "I'm Muhammad and I'm a Muslim." I thought, what the heck is this? Like, what's a Muslim? So asked a couple of questions, like, what does that mean? Like, he gave me a very brief description, and I was like, okay, and just left it at that, I guess. So then I've progressed through different jobs throughout my career, and I found myself gravitating towards the Muslims at every job I got to. So I'd speak to them about Islam and, like, what is it? Why don't you drink? Why don't you, like, have girlfriends? Why are you so weird? Like, what is wrong with you? So yeah, I just kept asking question after question after question, and this happened for, let's say, about 10 years, I guess. From every job I went to, I used to ask questions. It wasn't on a daily basis, I guess. It was just what about this? What about that? Until about 6-7 years ago, so I started working in a bank in Cardiff, and a sister came to work with us, and I was told, you have to teach this girl what we do. And I found we were talking about Islam a lot more than we were talking about what we were meant to be doing. And after probably about 2 months or so, she said to me, like, the best thing you can do is read a book, because I'll teach you cultured Islam. So on the lunch break, we went to Islamic Relief, got a book. It was an awful book. I wouldn't recommend it for your podcast looking back, it was awful, but it clicked with me. Something like set me off on a journey where I started reading more books and more books. So I left that job then, probably about 3 books into my journey. And I started a job in Newport, and I was still reading on my lunch breaks. And this one brother came up to me. The book I had, I can't remember what it was, must have had Islam written on the front or something. And he came up to me and he said, "Oh, why are you reading that?" So I explained to him, and he was like, "Oh, okay, if you've got any questions, please feel free to ask. If I can't answer them, I'll speak to somebody and get you the answer." I thought nothing else of it. I used to see them on lunch breaks and talk to them and see them around the office. And then it was Ramadan 2016. By this point, I was fasting. I wasn't a Muslim, but I was fasting because I knew it was Ramadan and like Muslims fasted, and I'll try it out, sort of thing. I'd already given up pork and alcohol and all that sort of stuff anyway. This boy that I was talking to originally came over to me because I was still reading books on my lunch break, and said, "Oh, you're not eating?" So I explained to him, "Oh no, I'm fasting," and he's like, "Oh, like, you're crazy. You're not a Muslim. Like, you do realize this is like the longest time of the year to fast. It's not like winter where you wake up and then go to work, come home and break your fast." He's like, "This is like 16 hours of fasting." A couple of days later, he came back to the office and he said, "I've told my parents about you. They want you to come over for iftar. We've got a sheikh who's going to be there. He'll be able to answer any questions you've got. Like, I think it'd be nice for you to come." So me thinking, "Oh, amazing. I got biryani or curry or whatever for iftar." I'm there straight away. So I turned up at his house. There was probably about 15 to 20 brothers in the house. So I walked in, being the only white guy in the room. The sheikh made a beeline for me. I stood out like a sore thumb, and he just started talking to me, asking me questions like, "Do you believe in Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him? And do you believe this? And what about the 5 pillars?" And he just turned around to me after about 10, 15 minutes and said, "Do you realize you're actually a Muslim?" And I was like, "No, I'm not." He's like, "No, you are living the life of a Muslim. You believe what we believe. You just haven't taken your Shahada yet." So he just said to me, he said, "Oh, sit down." And I thought, okay, not actually thinking what's going on. And then he turned around to everybody in the room and said, "Oh, please sit down." Everybody sat down. And then he said, "Repeat after me." And then next thing I know, I've got 15 to 20 brothers cuddling me and kissing me. And it was one of the most weirdest experiences of my life. But no, I just couldn't stop smiling whilst it happened as well. But that sheikh was from Singapore. He was around for another 2 months after I took my Shahada. So I spent the majority of my time, those 2 months after work with him then. So spending time learning how to pray, trying to learn Al-Fatiha, which I've realized only recently after taking Arabic lessons, I was shocking at. So that was how I came to Islam. I could talk to you about the last 4 years of my journey, but I may take up a little bit more time. So
I think we'll probably talk a bit more about that in the upcoming discussion that we're going to have. But Jazakallah khair, that's amazing. Did you feel a little bit blindsided by the sheikh? Like, it seems he sort of made a beeline for you. He knew you were coming.
I think they must have pre-warned him. Like, there's a guy who's interested. He's reading books and stuff. So yeah, I think they might have pre-warned him on that aspect. But I'm glad it happened that way, because if I'd thought about it and thought, "Oh, they're going to make me Muslim tonight," I don't think I would have gone.
Yeah.
Because none of us set out on this journey thinking we want to be a Muslim. We set out on this journey thinking, what's this oppressive? What's this weird? What's this backwards religion? And then we look at it and go, "Oh, subhanAllah, this is beautiful. This is the truth." Like, so yeah, if they had pre-warned me, I wouldn't have gone. And I don't think I would have been Muslim as quickly. I would have got there. It only took me like 16, 17, 18 years, but I would have got there eventually.
Alhamdulillah.
So yeah, it was a good thing that they didn't tell me.
Alhamdulillah. That's really a lovely story, mashallah. Let's bring in now Sheikh Bilal. Obviously, we're referring to you as Sheikh Bilal, mashallah. You've been Muslim for quite a long time. You've obviously studied and so on. But could you tell us, sort of like rewind a little bit back to the beginning and tell us how you actually came to Islam?
Yes, assalamu alaikum, everybody. Hope you are well. So I was born in Manchester, in Hume, and I lived there till I was about 8 or 9. Then I moved to Oldham. And when I moved to Oldham, I did have 1 or 2 Muslim friends in school in Manchester. I didn't know what Muslim was then. When I moved to Oldham, it was a predominantly Muslim area that we actually lived in. Most of the Muslims were from Pakistan or Bangladesh in that area. We were brought up in a Church of England family. My mother wasn't very religious, not unlike some of my other relatives. Some of my aunts were a bit more religious than my mother. We'd go to Sunday school now and again. My mother wasn't really too bothered about us going to Sunday school or going to church. My father wasn't there since I was a baby, really. So my mother was looking after me and my sister. And then my brother was born later on her own, really, for all of our lives since I can remember. Growing up, I would have Muslim friends, obviously, and mix with them and see some of their practices, but still very, very ignorant of the religion of Islam. Then in school, that culture of Islam became more apparent with, the movie Malcolm X came out whilst I was still in secondary. Spike Lee's movie about the biography of Malcolm X, and hip-hop culture as well. So we'd be listening to hip-hop music a lot, and they were speaking about Islam, like Public Enemy and the Wu-Tang Clan, A Tribe Called Quest, and Nas. I didn't know most of them were 5%ers, which is from the Nation of Islam, that are not actually Muslims per se, but there was still that influence. And I had never really understood Christianity, to be honest with you. I never actually grasped the Trinity. And we were always told that it was like an egg. So you have an egg. An egg has 3 parts. It has the shell, and then the white and the yolk. But all those 3 parts are one. That's how it was explained to us. But it never really sat comfortable with me. And we would always see this, picture of Jesus. He was white, and my grandmother, a picture of Jesus, and he was white with blue eyes. So it didn't sit right with me, to be honest with you, especially after watching Malcolm X and getting into that culture. Anyway, growing up, left secondary school, and there wasn't much opportunity, to be honest with you. Well, there was opportunity, but I didn't really take it. And I started mixing with gangs, getting involved in crime, stealing, selling drugs, getting into fights, just doing all sorts of stuff. And the gang that I was with, most of them were Muslims. They were all Muslims as well, doing the same thing. So we would go out partying, stealing, selling drugs, lots of stuff. I don't even want to go into much detail in case my mum's listening to this, because my mum doesn't even know about half of the stuff. Actually remember, we used to, sometimes we used to speak about religion. We'd go out clubbing on Eid and stuff. And, I'd ask questions to some of my friends about Islam. And, one of my friends says, instead of listening to us, we don't really know the right answers. It's similar to Martin's story, actually. He said, instead of listening to us, just read the Quran for yourself. So I went and purchased a copy of the Quran, terrible translation of the Quran. But it really struck me. And it really rang true to me. I only read the first two or three chapters, like to Surah Al-Imran, which is like the 3rd chapter. And it was speaking about the prophets and the oneness of God. And, it really believed in it from that point on. And then I stopped reading it. I thought, this is too much for me at this moment in time, all the stuff that I'm doing. And I stopped reading it. I remember going to prison. When I went to prison, and in prison, you get to choose which religious service you can go to. They give you a list, and you have to tick which one. And I ticked, the church service, and I actually ticked the Islam one, but they sent me to the church anyway. And I went a couple of times, and then I stopped. So to cut a long story short, I'm still in this lifestyle, and it was a Friday actually, and we were in my friend's house. My friend's house is, literally 10 meters away from the mosque, and there's drugs there and everything. And I don't want to go into too much detail again. There's a knock on the door. My friends, they still had, you might think, the Muslims are dealing drugs and getting up to crime, but they still have, a lot of respect for Islam. Ironically, they still have that love for Islam, even though they're doing wrong. So there's a knock on the door, and it's somebody from Tablighi Jamaat. Tablighi Jamaat is a propagation movement. They go out and they preach and they spread the message of Islam. It's quite well known amongst Muslims. And so the door knocked. My friend's whose house it was, he said, let him in. And everybody's like, what do you mean let him in? There's all this, put that away. He said, we can't turn him away. You have to let him in. So we said, okay, we hid all that to one side. Told him to come in. This brother, he was a mixed race brother. He's from the US. He's mixed race, African American and white. Obviously, he sees me there and he says, are you Muslim? I said, no. And he started speaking. He gave his normal speech as they do with Tabligh Jamaat first. And then he turned to me, obviously noticed me, maybe the odd one out in the room. And he says, are you Muslim? He said, no. He said, what do you believe in then? He says, I said, I've been reading the Quran. He says, oh, do you believe in the Quran? You believe in God? I said, yes. He said, you believe in the Prophet Muhammad? I said, well, yeah, I guess I do. He said, you believe in the angel? I said, yeah. So it was exactly the same as Martin's story, really. So ironic. So he said, basically, you're a Muslim then. You already believe in it, but you just haven't testified in front of everybody. So he asked me if I wanted to, and I took my Shahada from that day. That was in 1999. The Friday afterwards, one of my friends got killed in a car accident. He was 18 years old. That really affected everybody. And then the week after, half of my gang got raided and ended up in prison. But somehow I was saved from it all. Alhamdulillah. And then slowly I had to start making lifestyle changes. Again, without going into too much detail, certain things happened. I consider them to be miracles. I started to learn more and more about the religion, and eventually, I managed to leave that lifestyle. Alhamdulillah. In 2004, I got the opportunity to go abroad and study Arabic. So my first, aim was to study Arabic, because learning Arabic was always a challenge for me. Local teachers that I asked, there were only 2 imams that could speak English anyway in the whole of Oldham at the time. And it was quite a challenge to just learn how to read the Quran and learn Arabic. Alhamdulillah, I got the opportunity to go to Yemen and study Arabic. I did that for about 2 years. I learned Arabic very quickly, alhamdulillah. And then I came back to the UK. I worked, saved some money, and went to study it again in 2008. And I continued my studies until the end of 2014. And then I came back to the UK, alhamdulillah.
Sheikh Bilal, I wanted to ask you actually about New Beginnings. And is it Beginnings Wellbeing? I think it is, from what I can remember. I just wanted you to explain to the listeners what they're both all about and how you came about setting them up and what the purpose of these organisations are for.
Yes, so when I converted to Islam, there were other people who converted as well, and tried my best to support them. Obviously, I was, totally out of my depth. Didn't have the knowledge, didn't have the wisdom, didn't have the facilities, to look after them properly. And whilst I'm studying, I always had that intention in mind to do something for the convert community. There were organisations like Sister Batul's New Muslim Project, and when I came back to the UK after studying, I did some work locally, which wasn't very successful with converts. And then I met up with some other members of our team now, New Beginnings team now, and we decided to get together and work together to offer proper convert care in the UK. So we decided to initiate New Beginnings. We launched on the 1st of Ramadan. We've been going since. So the aim is to provide a holistic convert care package. So from the time the person takes a Shahada and enters into Islam, they have everything that they need for the foreseeable future anyway. We look at the education, their well-being is important as well. So we set up New Beginnings Wellbeing team to look after that. We've got qualified counsellors, people who are trained in counselling and psychotherapy that help us with that. We have a buddy system as well for those who need buddying and need a bit of extra support. And we have social activities as well. So we look at those 3 areas, that the tutorial aspect, the social aspect, and the well-being aspect.
New Beginnings is doing a lot of good work in the community. And I know, Martin, you're also involved in some projects to support new Muslims as well, aren't you?
Yeah, I currently volunteer for one of the local mosques in Cardiff. We do Brothers Halakha, but there's a sisters one as well. It's amazing, to be honest. I didn't know about it when I first became Muslim, and I wish I did, to facilitate me to be with similar people going through similar problems and to realise I'm not the only person there. The only issue, without being political, is it's very specific to that mosque. So if somebody takes a shahada in a different mosque, then that's their new Muslim, and they don't like to share. So we're currently involved in setting up a project called New Muslim Club. There's a couple of people involved. So yeah, no, we're trying to set up this club. So regardless of where you take your shahada, where you live, what madhab you follow, whatever it is, we just want you to be able to interact with new converts, new Muslims, reverts, whatever you want to call yourself. We're not going to be specific. Inshallah, it'll be this place where people can come together, meet like-minded people going through the same journey, share the experience, and get mentors to, inshallah, help them as well. So it sounds sort of similar to New Beginnings, but not to the same level with counsellors and stuff yet. But inshallah, in the future, it grows into this massive beast that we can help a lot of people with all sort of problems that they may come across. So.
That's absolutely fantastic. And you're right. I think we should move on to the next segment of our podcast. Today's topic is something that Amanda and I wanted to discuss early on, because we feel that sometimes, perhaps there's some difference between male converts and female converts and the opportunities and experience that they come across after taking Shahada. For example, sometimes it's not as easy for a woman or a sister to attend studies or to go on to advanced studies. They don't always have access to shayukh. And sometimes, unfortunately, we often see as well that many convert sisters who get married often end up in divorce and end up looking after the children and so on and so forth. And given that approximately 70% of all converts to Islam are actually female, it does seem to me anyway that convert women, they do tend to marry quicker, and whereas the convert men don't necessarily marry so quickly. And I just wanted to know, can you please debunk my theory if I'm right or wrong or not? So I think to begin with, if Amanda could define what male privilege is for our audience and also us as members of the panel as well, that would be fantastic, so then we can lead into our discussion from there. Because I think sometimes we come into the discussion, like I've clearly come in with my own idea. So if you could define what male privilege is, that would be fantastic.
Well, yeah, it is important to define it, but I think it's, in terms of defining privilege itself, it's a word that gets bandied around a lot these days, especially because social privilege is an issue that a lot of people are discussing, especially since, the Black Lives Matter movement became quite prevalent in recent months. So this idea of privilege, and a lot of people, I think, misunderstand it. They understand it that if you have privilege, then that means that you don't have difficulties in life, and that's not the case. Privilege just simply means that you don't face barriers in your life because of something that you cannot control. So, for example, male privilege is the idea that men do not face the same barriers as that women face, and the barriers that women face, we face purely because of our biological sex. So only because we are women, we're facing these barriers. For example, white privilege means that, you have an easier time accessing whatever it is that we're talking about simply because of the color of your skin. There are no barriers placed on you because of the color of your skin. So it doesn't mean that you don't suffer. We're not implying that men have an easy time of it when they convert. What we're asking, and actually we are asking, because obviously as women, we have our own lived experience, and you brothers will have your own experiences. But do you feel that you benefited in any way being male and becoming Muslim?
Yeah, that's much, much clearer. Thank you, Amanda. It's actually just debunked a few of my myths as well. So I'm really glad that we spoke about that, and I hope it helps our listeners. So if either one of you, either Martin or Sheikh, would like to discuss what male privilege means to you and whether you've had any kind of, like, what your experiences in particular have been since you've taken Shahada.
I 100% agree that there is a male privilege within the Islamic community. For example, from my own perspective, it's easier to walk into any mosque. No matter which mosque I go to, there's a male section. There's mosques in Cardiff that there's no female section. So you walk up to the door thinking you're going to pray. No, you get turned away. You can't. So that's the biggest difference so far. And that's not, from speaking to the people of the mosque, that's not why they did it, because they don't want sisters there. It was just a case of when they came, that was all they could afford, was that space. And because sisters have the option to pray at home, there was no facility made for them. But obviously nowadays it's something that they would, inshallah, try and facilitate if they bought a new place. I say inshallah. So that's a massive problem with some of the mosques around Cardiff and probably around Oldham and Manchester or whatever it is when they were built, it was built with the thought of sisters can pray at home, so let's just build it for the men. But therefore that obviously gives us the ability to speak to a sheikh, to speak to a brother quite easily, whereas you sisters, if you haven't got a mosque to go to and you haven't got a community, how are you going to learn? You got to teach yourself, and that's a dangerous place to be, is teaching yourself. So yeah, 100% agree. There's also the issue that culture brings to the religion, i.e. men are superior to women in some cultures, therefore we get given priority. I think a lot of the problem stems from culturalism rather than Islam, because if you actually look at Islam, there's nowhere it says men are superior to women. Women have more strengths in some places and men have more strengths in other places, which is clearly defined within our religion, but it does not actually say men should have more right to education, to sheikhs, to anything. So I think that's the biggest problem.
I think we need to also recognize that biologically, men and women, they are different. And, those biological differences, they will create certain barriers as well that are not necessarily related to there being more privilege. I think historically in Islam, if you look at female scholarship, for example, there's always been a larger number of male that have excelled in terms of scholarship. Even from the companions, there were great female companions who were, great scholars and at the highest level, but the men always outweighed them more. So you have the likes of Aisha, but remember Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, she couldn't marry anybody after him. She didn't have any children, and she was with the Prophet, so someone took directly from him, compared to, the companions that were able just to stay in the mosque and live in the mosque and learn from the Prophet directly. So certain barriers due to, the way the society is set out, the patriarchal societies, there are less barriers for men. And even in current times, so for example, a woman traveling on her own, that's a problem. Whereas, men, they can just go off and travel whenever they want. So there are barriers there. There are opportunities there. There is male privilege, yes, but maybe it has been over-exaggerated. And it's not something restricted to converts. It's throughout the Muslim community, whether you're a convert or non-convert. So, a convert might think, it's because I'm a convert that I'm not getting this opportunity. But Muslim heritage women, they will face the same problem as well. For example, in Yemen, I studied in Yemen, and there are very, very little opportunities for women to study in Yemen. But when I went to Syria, there were lots of opportunities. It wasn't, at the same level as men, but there were a lot more opportunities for women to study there. So cultural aspects, and there are other things that come into play as well. We need to recognize that. I think, for myself, I had to make a lot of sacrifices to go and study, to leave a lot of things behind. And I think women, they've been given a lot more compassion and empathy than men, which it doesn't allow them to just leave their families and leave everything behind because they're thinking about other people, whereas men, they're a bit more clinical in their thinking, and they're able to do that. We hear stories of scholars just going off for years and leaving their families behind and then returning back after several years. And again, the way the society is set up, a woman needing a relative to travel and the dangers associated with traveling, especially at that time. And, the way our masajid have been set up because of the way that the culture is in Muslim countries, they basically copied that same model of mosque and brought it to the UK, and it's not suitable. For example, in Oldham, I can only name, we've got about 30 mosques here, but I can only name a few actually have space for women, which is not suitable for the society that we're living in today. But I think I was reading as well that one of the scholars mentions in his books, there were more women that became saints than men But you'll find that most scholars, most of the books we have written, all of these books here, most of them are going to be written by men. I find it very rare to come across a book of hadith or a book of fiqh that was written by a woman. So I think women, they've been given that spiritual virtue and that spiritual privilege by their nature that Allah's created in them. And it's easier for them to achieve that higher level of spirituality. But for men, maybe it's easier for them to achieve scholarship. What do you guys think about that?
It's interesting what you're saying about women not having published scholarly works. I can't comment about that, but I can comment on an experience that I had several years ago, which was reading a family tree. So, in Arab families, they have these family trees. And there's nothing they love more than to be able to trace themselves back to the Prophet ﷺ. And we were looking at the family tree, and I noticed that every single name written on this family tree was a man's name. There were no women noted at all. And I asked about it. And the woman whose family tree it was looked at me and said, well, we don't put women in our family trees. Why would we do that? And I said, well, because they're alive. And I said, look, you've got this man here who is noted on this family tree as having no children. He could have had 10 daughters for all we know. But as it is, it looks like he and his wife were barren. He has descendants possibly, but they don't exist in this family tree. And she said, well, that's because when a woman gets married, she goes to her husband's house. And I was like, no, that's a Christian thing. That's not a Muslim thing. We keep our last names. We don't become our husband's possessions. What are you talking about? And then she said, well, no, we don't include women in our family trees. And I said, but you're telling me that you are descended from the Prophet ﷺ. And she said, yes. And I said, he didn't have any sons who survived into adulthood. So how is that possible? And she said, well, through Hassan and Hussein. And I said, whose children were they? And she said, well, Fatima. And I was like, but she can't be on the family tree, can she? And there was just no answer for that. And I thought, this is such a strange mentality to have. And it is such an un-Islamic mentality to have, because it doesn't come from Islam to delete women from history. And I suspect that there have been women who have authored books, but that it's been just erased, not propagated, and so on. Allah knows best what's happened to it. I have heard stories of, that there have been great female scholars who perhaps wrote with pen names as a form of modesty. And so we may not know that they are women even because they're using pen names. Allahu alam. Sheikh, did you want to jump in here?
Yes, I wasn't saying that there weren't female scholars. Ibn Hajar's teachers, many of his teachers were females, hadith scholars. But when we look at the majority of scholarship, and the majority of works that have been written, there have been men. That's, you can see that clearly. That's no denying.
That is true, yes. And I think that there is just that tendency, and this isn't exclusive to Muslim communities. I think this is across the board. I mean, women in the West have, devised this ideology of feminism as a reaction to male privilege and oppression by men and violence towards women and so on. And so, when we're saying that, if we're talking about, there is male privilege, this isn't purely a Muslim problem or a Muslim issue. Some of it is natural, as Sheikh said. There are biological differences that are just going to naturally create barriers to certain things. And I think that, to me, I'm going to be a bit controversial here. I think that men also face certain barriers socially because of that. There are certain spaces that men may find difficult or awkward to access because of that. We also put a lot of pressure on men to perform a certain way that we don't put on women. And Martin, did you want to jump in?
Sorry, yeah, with regards to your pressures on men, I was going to say there's the adverse to that as well, is like, as soon as a sister becomes Muslim, is like, where's your hijab, lose the skinny jeans, lose the tight tops. Whereas a brother, he can still wear his skinny jeans to the mosque. He doesn't have to grow a beard. So there's the opposite side. So that's the male privilege in my eyes, again, is like, we're not as pressured to be perfect like sisters are. Like, so I feel like sisters are expected to be this extra level. Like, people used to look at me and go, mashallah, you're amazing, you're clean, you're such a new Muslim. But then the sisters would get that extra bit of, oh, she's a new Muslim, why is she not wearing hijab? Oh, she's obviously not practicing properly. Or like, I could be in a shisha bar every night, but they wouldn't have seen that. They wouldn't have cared. Like, but just the fact that I'm Muslim, but our sister's not wearing hijab, so she's not a good Muslim. So 100%, I think sisters have an issue with that level of expectation as well.
If I could interject, I actually agree with what you're saying. I think speaking from personal experience here, 15 years later, nothing much has changed. Sorry, there's still the same narratives out there. There's still the same rhetoric towards how a woman should be. For example, one of the books I would never recommend would actually be The Ideal Muslimah, because it's like a fairy tale. It's too far-fetched, and similarly, when a sister does, in particular, a sister takes her shahada, yes, there's expectation to, all of a sudden. I remember actually, I would like to share an anecdote actually. There was one time when I went to see Sheikh Khalid Yassin in a talk in Middlesex University in North London. This was many moons ago, and I actually think it was probably before I was even married, so I was still very new to Islam. And I remember, if anyone has heard any Sheikh Khalid Yassin talks, he's very passionate, and very emotive with the way he speaks. Anyway, so the auditorium was packed. It was at a university, so the auditorium was packed. And then there was a shahada at the end, and it was a young girl. And I remember there was this another young sister who went straight over to her and goes, "You're going to wear this and you're going to do that." And she said it in it was like a really nice way. It was in the tone I'm using, and you're going to wear khimar and you're going to do this and you're going to do that. I'm like, hold up a second, back off. She's literally just taken her shahada, and now you want her to walk around as if she's just dropped off a plane from Saudi Arabia. I mean, come on, it doesn't work like that. You've got to slow down a little bit. It's very common, unfortunately, on social media. And obviously now we're in a social media age, everyone is on social media of some kind. And, if a woman, for example, especially a Muslim woman, speaks up about any kind of abuse within marriage or sexual abuse or anything like that, she's often labeled a feminist. That can be the instant reaction from certain male peers anytime she says anything. And we're not talking about feminism actually, because all we want is our Islamic rights. That's what we want. We're not referring to Western feminism at all. So that's quite worrying, and I would like to see that narrative change. And then the other thing which I would like you both to touch upon as well, Sheikh Bilal and Martin, is marriage. Because yes, maybe Muslim women generally, but convert women in particular. And again, another anecdote to add to this in a second would be, we're often not pushed, but highly encouraged, shall we say, to look for a spouse very early on into our Islam. It could be within the first few months even. It doesn't even have to be a year, and we're often told that, rhetoric like, you'll find someone, you'll settle down. That was actually what was said to me. I remember in the early days of Islam, I started wearing hijab before I took my shahada actually. And I was in work, and I used to work in a very busy train station. And I do believe it was there that, I think he must have been Pakistani or something, but, we had a lot of Muslim clientele come and go as well. He asked me about whether I was married or not, and I really wasn't. I had just taken my shahada. And he said to me, "Oh, don't worry, when you get married, things will settle down for you." Now, I don't really know what he meant by that, but I can absolutely assure you, no, they did not. So I wanted to, and fair enough, that's my experience, but I wanted to ask, both yourself, Martin, and Sheikh Bilal, what kind of experiences have you had around marriage or looking to get married or things like that? Have you had any difficulties? Were you pressured into marriage, getting married or not? Or if your experiences were the complete opposite. I think it'd be really interesting to discuss, again, from a male perspective and a male convert perspective, your experiences, not just for myself, for Manda, and also the listeners listening.
Or even just those experiences of brothers who people who you've supported and so on. It doesn't have to be the personal experience.
Who would like to go first?
Well, my own personal experience is that it has been very difficult, to be honest with you, for male converts to find a spouse. When I converted, nobody, gave me any offers. The only offer I got was on, brother in the mosque. Don't know how sincere it was. We know somebody in Pakistan, this girl in Pakistan, and you can marry her. We'll, when she comes here, you can decide to keep her or get rid of her if you want. that was literally the only offer that I got. So there are challenges. We know brothers, they get married. I know one brother got married to a Pakistani girl, and her family never accepted him. It's like he's a Gora. He's a white, he's not Muslim. It's very, very difficult for convert men, especially if you're black as well. If you're white, I think it's a lot easier. But if you're a black convert man, because they already have that anti-blackness as well, in some cultures, it does make it very, very, very difficult. And, we have the opposite. When there's a white female convert, for example, they're all trying to dive on top of her, and for pressure into getting married. And, so those are the challenges that we're facing. And unfortunately, it's still not much. It is getting better than it was 20 years ago. But we still have those attitudes, unfortunately, in our community.
I think from a personal perspective, I 100% agree that there is not male privilege in this aspect. I was going to say female privilege in marriage, I think, because like Sheikh Bilal said, the white sisters are looked at as a sort of a trophy icon, I guess, in some ways. Like you said, everybody's like, oh, yeah, sign me up. Like, I know I've spoken to Amanda previously about this. Like, if somebody comes to the mosque and says, I want to marry a revert, a man comes to the mosque, sorry, and Amanda says, oh, yeah, we got a lovely sister from somewhere non-white, basically. And they're like, oh, no, I want a white revert. And so there's that like fetish or whatever it might be for revert white sisters. From a personal perspective, I either Aisha or Amanda, you might be able to correct me on this. I feel like as a brother, it is harder to get married because I suppose, Islamically, we're taking charge of that sister. So the father has the reservations of he's going to go back to his old ways. I went through this with my own search for getting married. He'll go back to his own ways. He'll take her to the pub. He'll like drag my daughter away from Islam. Like, whereas with a sister, they think they can mold her or bring her in. My son will keep her on the straight path without even thinking like my child could actually walk away from Islam at any point, regardless of who they marry. This isn't a given that your child will always be a Muslim. So I think from a personal perspective, yeah, you have the issues of he's white, he's bald, like any excuse you can think of, there would always be an excuse of, no, we don't want him. He's got kids. He's always going to pick them over you. There's something, like whether I'm 5'9" or he's not 6 foot, maybe, like there will be some stupid excuse to not give their daughter away. And that's not all of those are my own personal experience. That's from brothers that I help mentor and stuff. But I think there is a restriction on men getting married. And with regards to being forced to be married, not forced, there's no such thing as forced marriage in Islam, sorry, as in being encouraged to marry quickly. I was encouraged quite quickly to marry, but I was encouraged to marry my own kind, i.e. a revert, because none of the brothers would want to give away their daughter to a revert, I guess. So yeah, that was my experience straight away after becoming a Muslim was, oh, you need to complete half your deen and get married. And like Aisha said, things will be easier to settle down when you get married. But yeah, 4 years in, I'm glad I didn't get married quickly because I know of quite a few sisters who end up being bent by the marriage. So yeah, I'm glad I didn't get married too quickly. And with my journey, the first 2 years, I probably wasn't in the right place to get married because I didn't have my fundamentals locked in. And I think that's one of the key things that people need to have before they get married is to lock in those fundamentals and know what they are as a Muslim before bringing somebody else into their life. So yeah, that's my 2 pence worth.
I think what you've said, the last thing there is incredibly important. And we say this for sisters. When we're mentoring sisters, we say to them, don't rush it. You need to learn who you are as a Muslim before you bring another who is essentially a stranger into the mix of your life. But especially for brothers, at the very least, you're going to be leading the prayers in the home. You need to know how to pray properly. You need to know the basics, at least of the fiqh, to make sure that you're doing that right and setting that good example. And when you have kids, inshallah, you need to be able to set that good example as well. So it's across the board wise to not rush into it. And there is pressure, subhanAllah. And I think that we need to sort of be resilient against that. Aisha, what did you want to say?
No, I was just going to say, to add to what Martin said as well. I think the thing is with convert women, it's not actually a nice thing to be fetished. I personally, for me, and I'm going to talk about my own feelings about this, I feel cheap and disgusting. I don't feel respected. I don't feel valued. I don't feel as if I'm looked at, as if I'm a complete person, a bit of fluff, I suppose you could say, and I am going to talk a little bit about my own feelings about it because unfortunately, I've gone down that whole route of being married. I've not been married once. I've been married twice, both times to a born Muslim and both times treated like something worse than the bottom of my shoe. So, which is why now I would, if I were to get married again, I would actually, funny enough, Martin, you said, you were told to marry somebody who's a convert or revert as well. Well, to be honest with you, I think I should have done that. It might have been difficult to find somebody, and I've noticed that convert men tend to like the other. It might be a bit challenging for somebody like myself who's clearly not. But no, I actually think that I would prefer to marry somebody from my own, well, maybe not my own background, but somebody similar to myself who understands me, who gets me, doesn't have that cultural baggage. I've been told stupid things similarly to you, Martin, like, oh, you're no good because you can't make a roti. You're similar similar things to you, Martin, like, I've also got kids from my first marriage, and funny enough, he did, he had kids from his first marriage, but because I was female, it wasn't okay. And just generally, I have not had the best of experiences. And the reason why I say this, and again, I say this only to make aware of how it really is for certain convict women. Obviously, I think white women do have it easier than others, and that's awful, and that's a massive topic. I think racism is another topic in and of itself, but it is real. These things do happen. I was saying, I can't remember who I was saying this to, but I do think, of all the convert sisters, especially white convert women I know, or maybe not even white, but all the convert sisters I know who have married heritage or born Muslims, I can count, over the 15 years, I can count the sisters who still are, married to these heritage Muslims on one hand after all these years, because something has gone wrong somewhere. They've been either expected to conform to the cultural norms that the family adopts. And going back to what we said about having the fundamentals in place as well, absolutely spot on, because if we look at how sometimes Muslim men portray marriage and divorce, it does come across as if, well, the man is in control of divorcing. So say, for example, if the marriage does go south, a woman does have a way out. She can ask for khula. And if there's abuse, then she can ask for fasakh, but they don't tell you this. And I think it's highly imperative, especially unfortunately in this day and age where we're living, where we've just discussed the things that we are discussing, i.e. abuses, taking advantage of, fetishes, etc., that a woman knows her rights Islamically, because not only do convert women not usually know their rights, but I can tell you how many born Muslim women didn't even know what a khula was. So it's really important that any brother or sister listening, any sister in particular, because obviously as women we want to look after our own here, that please don't rush into marriage. This is just a side note. Don't rush into marriage. Learn your religion. Take your time. Similarly to what Martin and Sheikh Bilal said.
Yeah, can I add one more thing? Sorry, with regards to knowing your worth as well. As in, know what dowry you're entitled to. Don't take a reduced amount just because of the colour of your skin, whether you be white or black, and just because you're a convert, it doesn't matter. If they're willing to pay, I'll say South Asian. If you're of a South Asian persuasion and you marry a South Asian, you're likely to get over £10,000. If you marry a convert, you're lucky if you get £1,000. Mm-hmm. Don't stand for it, basically. Know your worth as a woman, and know that regardless of the skin colour, whether you're a convert or a born Muslim, you're still worth the same.
Sheikh, you had something to say?
I think having guardians as well is important for convert women. Like Sister Aisha mentioned, 70% of people who convert in the UK are women, and I think having proper guardians for them. So a guardian will look after their affairs in relation to the marriage and after the marriage. If a woman converts, she probably wouldn't have a Muslim guardian. So I think having Muslim male guardians from the community to look after their affairs, inform them about how to obtain a divorce or know the marriage, and about the dowry and so on. That will make a massive difference.
This is an issue that we've talked about a lot, because you have a lot of sisters coming to Islam who have been previously married, have children, and the community will tell them, you don't need a mahram, you don't need a wali, you don't need a wakil, you've been married before, you're considered mature, it's not like you're a young girl. And okay, technically, yes, that's true, but I am very, when sisters come and ask me about it, I'm like, I would never, ever recommend that. I mean, the first time that I got married, I had a wali, and well, alhamdulillah, I mean, I may Allah forgive him, I still have good relations with that family and everything, and he just didn't know what he needed to do. But, we do need brothers to step up and take on this role. And this issue of traveling as well, this is a funny one, actually, Sheikh, because you brought this up about traveling. And this is always a bit of a sore point for me, because when I first took Shahada, about 6 months after, I was doing my a master's degree in London, and I was awarded a full scholarship to go back to Japan for 1.5 years to study. to start a PhD. And the deal was I go over there for 18 months, do the first half of the PhD, come back to London and complete it. And because I was a new Muslim, everybody's rushing to give you advice. And I was informed that I couldn't live abroad without a mahram. I thought, that doesn't sound right, because I knew loads of Muslim women living everywhere without mahram. And I was living in London without mahram. So, clearly I could live somewhere without a mahram. So I dug a bit and found out, okay, I can't travel except for with a mahram. So I thought, fine, I'll take my dad with me. My dad can take me there, drop me there, make sure I'm set up, and then come back. But then I was informed that no, because he's not Muslim, he can't be trusted to act as your mahram. And I mean, if anybody had ever met my dad, you would know, he is the most ethical person ever, far more ethical than some people's actual mahrams I've met, subhanAllah. And I was just sort of thinking, how can we overcome this? Because I feel that I gave up my scholarship on that basis. And it is, I can't say I regret it. Alhamdulillah, it's all Allah's plan. But I sort of felt maybe if I had been advised better at that time. And I do think that there are a lot of sisters who, we're talking about privilege. And one of the things about privilege is that in society, we're talking about how do we remove barriers? How do we help sisters to overcome the barriers that exist? How do we help, when we're talking about, racial privilege, how do we remove barriers non-white people face? And so on. How do we remove barriers that people with disabilities face, and so on? So what can we do about this when it is seemingly, quote unquote, religiously mandated barriers?
I think it's difficult. It's going to take time, and it will never be able to eradicate it totally. Sticking to sound scholarship, organizations like New Beginnings and obviously the New Muslim Club, they will be able to give proper advice to converts. We have a wealth of good scholarship as well in the UK that they should refer to it. Allah says, if you fall into dispute about something, then refer it back to Allah and His Messenger and those of authority. So taking it back to Allah and His Messenger, going back to the people in authority, the scholars that are reliable.
Sheikh, can I interject and ask you who you consider to be reliable, so to give some sign pointing for any new Muslims who might be listening, apart from New Beginnings?
Myself.
Of course. Yeah, of course.
Myself. There are good organizations like I mentioned the New Muslim Project, Sister Batul, which is now transformed to the Convert Muslim Foundation, Mu'alif Initiative. There are good resources out there. There needs to be a lot more. You need to do a lot more in the community, and it's a long struggle. We need to educate the community as well about conversion to Islam and the experiences of converts. And this podcast, is one of the means as well of us being able to do that, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair for that. Unfortunately, we have reached the end of our time for today's episode. I'd like to say to both of our guests, Martin and Sheikh Bilal, Jazakallah khair for joining us. Any final words from both of you? Martin, is there anything you wanted to say as we end?
Jazakallah khairan for letting me come on and give my 2 pence worth. Inshallah, people listening will take it on board and either step up or signpost people to the places like the Sheikh just mentioned.
Barakallah feek. Sheikh Bilal?
Thanks for having me on. May Allah bless you and allow this to continue, inshallah, and make it successful. Anybody who is struggling and needs assistance, they can contact us on our website, beginnings.org.uk. So it's just beginnings.org.uk. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram. You can find us there, and we're there to offer support to any converts, whatever it is, inshallah.
And Jazakallah khairan to you both. It has been an absolute pleasure having you on, and I'm really pleased you could take time out of your busy schedules to join here today. So I'd just like to say Jazakallah khairan, and inshallah we will see you soon. So for now, this is Aisha.
And this is Amanda.
And this has been Converts Unplugged.
Until next time, Assalamu alaikum.